Welcome, everybody, to the Week 3 edition of Beyond the Model, where we give out some NFL DFS picks, lineup advice, small field and large field GPPs. We'll be breaking down the Occupy model, going a little bit further than that to see what we need to do to win our contests, especially some high field, some large field, high risk contests. I'm your host, Moose, at CFB_Moose on Twitter is where you can find me, or I guess X now, Brian. I have to say it, right?
I You can say it. I'm gonna be the old person who refused to call it what it used to be called, or what is now called. I'm not calling it X until
Okay.
I'm legally required to.
Perfect. All right. So on Twitter is where you can find me at CFB_Moose, alongside Brian, co-founder and CEO of Occupy, at Brian Jester FF on Twitter. X is where you can find him. How's it going, man?
I'm, I'm good, Moose. I'm good. Every time I see it, my initial reaction is X. What the hell is X? And I realize that that's what they're referring to. I will continue to call it Twitter. But yeah, happy to be here. I know a good amount of our members won some money last week, specifically from this show. So hopefully we can keep that rolling this week. Some good ideas. I think a much tougher and even more typical slate uh, than we'd seen the first 2 weeks of the season.
And not to sound clickbaity, but wait until the end so you hear one of our definitely beyond the model stacks, because I think, Brian, I think of the first 3 weeks, this is my favorite beyond the model stack, where we talk about the crazy ones. We're all going to talk about the ones that are in the plug, that are show up highly in the model, but there's the ones that you need to dig a little deeper. You need to dig beyond the model, and you can find some nuggets. And I think I found one, Brian, that I really like. I sent it to you before the show. I think that's gonna be my solo bullet for the Millie Maker.
I'm excited. I'm excited to hear it now. I know what you mentioned to me, but now I'm excited to hear the entire idea. And like you said, yeah, we'll cover all the good stuff, all the really actual good ideas, and then we'll get beyond that with some Galaxy Brain and some and answer questions along the way because this is a live Q&A. So
Yeah, exactly. So basically, the story of this show is beyond the model. We're going to take a look at, talk about stacks that either they could be show hype in the model, they could be in the plug, they could just be. We ask the person down the street what do they think, and we're going to talk about some stacks. If you have questions along the way, definitely go ahead and ask. If you're asking about specific what to do in a certain situation, please let us know. If it's on DraftKings, FanDuel, season long, what type of contest you're playing in. Just give as much context as possible so we can give you the best answers possible. So, Brian, I'm going to start it off, actually. Not a stack that ranks highly on my side, but it is the cover boy with Tua. And that Miami stack, they rank kind of high up there, like third ranked for me. Um, Seem to be doing well for the first 2 weeks of the show. What's your thoughts on Miami?
yeah, so this is actually my top stack. I think it's actually Chris's top stack as well that he wrote up in the plug that he talked about in last night's video, which may be surprising to some since Minnesota and LA will be the most popular stack of the week, the highest total of the week. But for me, there are enough factors, both in the model and hashtag beyond the model, that are in favor of Miami and Denver. So obviously Miami's side, right? We know their offensive prowess. Denver's also missing starting free safety Justin Simmons, just to put a little cherry on top of this matchup. The biggest question on Miami's side, Moose, is the availability of Jalen Waddle. If you're watching this on replay, we went live in the past at 2 p.m. Eastern on Saturday. I think we'll know by 4 p.m. Eastern on Saturday whether or not Jalen Waddle is playing. Moose, I had just assumed he was out once he missed Wednesday and Thursday, but I guess because they play a little bit later, they have the opportunity to progress him protocol Friday through Sunday morning. And he was in the red no contact jersey on Friday in I want to say stage 2 or stage 3 of the concussion protocol. So a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel and getting Waddle in the game. Even if he does play, we actually have some Curtis Samuel pieces, some cheap pieces that have been playing in this offense. But if he's out, it actually really opens it up because then we get Braxton Berrios and or River Craycraft as complementary pieces in these Dolphin stacks.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this would be like the first time someone's actually played in the concussion protocol. Like, it's very hard to get out of. So we all thought he was done for, and then once we saw he's practicing but still in concussion protocol, we're like, oh, he has a chance. I have it up here. I mean, you have Tyreek at 9K, assuming Waddle's out. Barrios at 3,600, Craycraft at 3,400. So basically, almost a $6,000 savings on DraftKings, $4,500 on FanDuel. That you can go elsewhere. And I think an overarching problem that we'll talk about, Brian, is it's hard to stack to do some expensive stacks Tua's expensive, Tyreek's 9K. It's kind of hard to fill out around the model there. Fill up the rest of your lineup there. So it's going to be very tough. I know Tua's only 7, so it's not terrible. But if you do play Tyreek, how do you go beyond that?
It's really tough, like you said, especially on DraftKings. I think on FanDuel, most people won't have this issue. You're generally able to fit whichever stacks you want and not have to sacrifice too many spots. However, if you run 300 lineups in our builder, in any other industry optimizer for this slate, and you include any type of correlation rules, you're going to end up with multiple 3K players and or multiple 2 tight end lineups. And historically, Moose, especially on 12-game slates, we know that has pretty much been not the move. Not plus EV to play double tight ends, not plus EV to play multiple 3K guys. So that's a little interesting. Yeah, sure. If we get into, week 9, week 10, and there's 6 teams on bye, we have less games on the slate, sure, it becomes much more likely to do that.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned at the top of the show, it is a little bit harder this week. This feels like a more normal week despite it being 12 games. So I think we actually have to think a little bit and figure out how we're going to do this.
Yeah, one of the points we talked about before the show was I think it's very hard to come up with a good lineup, and I think most of my lineups are actually going to be one of these cheap running backs. There's so many cheap running backs on the slate this week. That's probably what I'm going to be putting in the flex. I'm for the first time trying my 20 max out again. Full transparency, a lot lower allocation the first couple of weeks of the season as we gather more data, as I'm ramping up my allocation, and I'm feeling pretty good about this week. So I think if you go Tua, Tyreek, or I guess in any case, an expensive quarterback, expensive wide receiver, you got to have some serious thought and maybe fill out that piece last. Maybe say, hey, I'm thinking about stacking Miami. Let me build around that without even putting them in and then see what I have left over. If you can make it work with Tyreek, all power to you, because he's definitely going for like 120 and 2 touchdowns while he's out.
You would think so. I mean, if I was the defensive coordinator for the Broncos and Jalen Waddle was out, I would do everything in my power not to let Tyreek Hill beat me. Okay, yeah. If you're going to score and beat me with Durham Smythe and Braxton Berrios, River Craycraft, and Eric Ezukanma, hats off. You beat me. I'm not going to let Tyreek go for 250 and 3, right? Yeah. But to your point about the cheap running backs, you look at our model, the top 2 running backs are 5,500 or less on DraftKings. 3 of the top 4 are under 5,600, and 4 of the top 6 under 5,600. Mm-hmm. If you want those names, Jerome Ford, Gus Edwards, Zach Moss, Joshua Kelly. So I really do think that is the move. Gus Edwards in particular, we have just 1% projected ownership on DraftKings, so I really love to see that. The other 3 guys are much more popular, but I do think that is the move. And if you don't go that route, I think you have to Curtis Samuel. And honestly, the Miami side is the perfect Curtis Samuel piece with Craycraft or Berrios if Waddle is out. But I do think the other way to play this, and as you mentioned, playing cheaper quarterbacks, is going with the Denver side. Mm-hmm. Russ Wilson has shown, week 1 didn't show it, but last week showed it, has a high ceiling and super low ownership on their side, both receivers 5% or less. So you play Russ with Cortland Sutton and or Jerry Jeudy running back with Tyreek. Yeah. Now you open up all the salary that you need to fit in Tyreek Hill without having to sacrifice other positions.
Exactly. That's the part. That's what I'm leaning towards most of my lineups that I'm building around that, using that more expensive stud on the bring back. But yeah, the next stack that I actually want to talk about, we've kind of hinted at them in the beginning, probably the most popular. They're at the top of my rankings, is that Chargers and Minnesota stack. Justin Herbert, number 1 quarterback in our model. Where is Kirk? And he's up there, 4th. We have a bunch of the Chargers. We saw it last week, Brian. The Chargers it's such an explosive offense. I think I mentioned this in our Occupy staff chat. Not a big fan of Josh Kelly. I don't know if I'm box score watching or if they're just not going to use him. But I think you can pair up Herb with either a wide receiver that you want, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen. You can play both. But I think that's where a great cheap piece is going to come in. Justin Jefferson didn't do as much as we'd like. Is he going to do as much to fill out his $9,300 price tag? Probably not. Maybe you fit it in with Jordan Addison. Maybe even go down to KJ Osborne. But I think there's a lot of cheap pieces there. A lot of different ways you can go. Even if you flip it on the other side and go with Kirk Cousins. They're both high in the model. Seems like overall, I think the highest total on the slate as well. So nothing wrong with that.
No, I think, and this isn't some secret, right? If you read any content, you look at the betting markets, any casual player is going to start clicking in players from this game. So it's not a secret. And where Moose and I are talking about the difficulty in fitting in some pieces into your lineup, that's mostly on DraftKings. FanDuel, this isn't really an issue. You can stack the hell out of this game if you want to. 2x1, 2x0, 3x0, whatever you want to do. Really not much of an issue. So there are a couple, and shout out to some of our Discord members who even brought up some of these ideas. But I think the ways to play it, Moose, is you got to play multiple low-owned, cheap guys outside the stack if you decide to go this route, because it's going to be so popular. The other option, and I like this idea, is playing either Kelly or Madison, both of which have disappointed in the last week. Kelly is going to get more ownership, obviously, because of the cheaper price tag and what he did in week 1. But playing the running backs from this game in hopes that we get a disproportionate amount of the scoring through the ground game as opposed to through these quarterbacks' arms, or what we've seen a lot of the top NFL DFS pros do in high stakes GPPs is just get your exposure to this game through mini stacks, right? Mm-hmm. Play Jefferson and Allen, play Kelly and Jefferson, play Osborne and whoever, right? Yeah. Like one player from one side, one from the other, and then some of these cheaper stacks we've already discussed and/or we'll talk about soon can help you get a more balanced lineup. You don't have to jam in these terrible 3K plays.
Yeah, and we'll talk about another strategy as well, a different stack. I don't think it fits for this, but yeah, there's different ways to attack a stack. If you find out, you don't have to just instantly go quarterback, wide receiver 1 for that team. Yeah. Just try and think outside the box a little bit. Just say, I mentioned in the last stack we talked about, maybe build your lineup around it and then see what kind of stack you can do. I was actually doing this with the lineup builder, and we did what I was doing. I specifically did this with the Charger stack. Is I forced it to do 300 lineups and locked in a 2-0 stack for each possible combination and a 2-1 stack for each possible combination. And I tried to look at, what player is trying to be in the most of these lineups. Let's say, generally speaking, it was like, please play Tony Pollard. It was like, play Tony Pollard, and it was, sprinkling in a lot of these cheap running backs around, and mainly in the flex as well. So you have Tony Pollard, you have a whatever 2-0 stack you want, and it didn't really like many of the cheap wide receivers. I think there was only one that was above 20%. The rest of them were sprinkled in. So it's like, do I really want to go this route? And then once I dropped down to not using like Justin Jefferson, went to Addison, it opened up a lot more. There was like 10 or so players that I could sprinkle in, no problem. So I think doing that route of seeing what's possible, and I used our lineup builder for that. I'm sure there's others that have the same capability. Just basically lock in 2 players, and tell it not to include anyone else from that team, and see what shows up. And if you're like, man, these are all trash plays, then you probably shouldn't go that route.
Yeah, no, exactly. That's a really smart way to do it, Melissa. Is just to build to lock in a stack like Herbert, Keenan Allen, lock in a 2x1 stack, lock in a 2-0 stack, or lock in mini stacks and just build around it. And you'll generally see pretty quickly, I like these groups of lineups a lot better. You can go that route. So I think both of us agree, despite these higher priced quarterbacks ranking higher in our stack rankings, on DraftKings, I think the move might be just to get some exposure to these games, but stack the cheaper quarterbacks. I think your lineups are going to look a lot better this week.
Yes, 100%. 100% on that. So that's one way to how to build those popular stacks. Brian, do you have another stack that you want to talk about?
The next on my list actually is, so we've discussed Miami, Denver. We've discussed Minnesota and LA. Next on my list is Chicago and Kansas City. I believe they were pretty high for you as well. Mm-hmm. Mahomes 4th in our model, 11% projected on DraftKings, but he's 8,300. So this presents the same problem, especially if you try to pair him with Kelsey. It's the exact same problem as these other stacks, right? What is an interesting side is Justin Fields, who has completely disappointed through 2 weeks. I'm sure if you've been on Twitter, you've seen the stats about the lack of design runs they've done through 2 weeks compared to how they used Fields last year. Best believe that this coaching staff knows, right? This front office, they know, right? The whole organization is in shambles, as I was talking about with Chuck yesterday. I've never seen a team implode so quickly through 2 weeks, between Fields throwing the coaching staff under the bus, between their coach being investigated, between them getting equipment stolen from the field. Like, I saw yesterday, most right. You heard that story, right?
I don't think I have. No.
So something like $100,000 worth of equipment got stolen from Chicago's field.
That's
And this happened late in the week after all this other shit happened. And the tweet I saw was like, imagine being that employee that had to go into the the GM's office and be like, listen, I know this is a bad time, but someone just stole a lot of our shit.
Jesus. It's going to be like,
Anyways,
I was going to say, it's going to be like community service when you didn't have enough people to join. You're like, just turn your shirt inside out. We'll draw an 8 on there and say you play for them.
yeah.
Like,
Right. Anyways, this is a long way of saying
yeah.
I think Chicago will get back on the field's track. And as we know, as you and I have said in week 1 and week 2, still to this point, ADP is a better predictor of rest of season fantasy scoring than weeks 1 and 2 are. So if Justin Fields was being drafted in the 4th round in most fantasy leagues, we should tend to expect him to regress more towards a 4th round quarterback in fantasy scoring. If that's the case for me, he is still expensive, but he's 2% owned. So just another idea I had.
I know, and I have the note jotted down here. Thanks for Brian for putting in all the injury stuff out there in the Discord channel. But Kansas City's play caller on defense is out, so it's gonna be a boost to Chicago's offense. I like the Chicago side more, especially with the low ownership. And if you want to go ahead and do that one expensive piece on the bring back, it works out perfectly. I was building a handful of Chicago lineups as well. Just little things like that. That's one of the beyond the model tidbits that we talk about. Defensive injuries, people who are questionable, who's boosting from that. That's the stuff we like to talk about. Yeah, so I think I like the Chicago side more than Kansas City.
Yeah, I think so. And Ed's in the chat, totally not the FBI. He posted his idea in Discord right before we went live, saying playing naked Mahomes and loading up on all these other stacks. I don't hate it because you don't really know where the scoring is going to go for Kansas City outside of Kelsey. But in large field, 150 max, as we've seen moves in the past, I think it is a profitable strategy to try to mix in some of those guys because they are cheap and they will allow the rest of your lineup. Why not engage in correlation for those cheap pieces? So Sky Moore, Kadarius Toney, MVS, Rashee Rice, if Kadarius Toney does miss the game, I think he's going to play, but Rice if not. So I think mixing in those Curtis Samuel pieces specifically in that game could help. But again, this is just the continuing theme of these top stacks being pretty expensive to fit in and having to force a cheap piece.
Yeah, I mean, even if you play it that route, right? Let's say you fade Kelsey and you go with the 5,000 savings or whatever the hell, because he's like 20,000 on DraftKings. You just go down to like a $4,500 wide receiver and hope Kelsey doesn't score 30 and someone else gets one of his touchdowns instead, and that just shoots you up the leaderboard.
Yep.
Super Pete
exactly,
here.
Exactly. We do have a question here in the chat. We're on the same page. You go for it.
Yeah. Super Pete says, with Thomas ruled out for Washington, who is more the receiving tight end, Turner or Bates? Brian, what do you think? I was thinking Bates, probably.
Well, so I know some people in best ball were drafting Turner in like round 18, round 20 in DK drafts, thinking he might be the guy this year. If you look at last week, Logan Thomas banged up early. They ran roughly the same number of routes. Bates actually saw 4 targets as opposed to just 2 for Cole Turner. Maybe they trust Bates a little more. I think Turner's the more dynamic receiver, but it's really a small sample, and they'll likely be splitting. I think it's flip a coin. If you just look at last week, it's Bates. If you look at season-long ADP, it's Turner. If we're in the belief of ADP is more predictive, I guess Turner's the guy there, but it is pretty thin because they will be splitting the reps.
Yeah. Hawk Dark has a thing here saying that Stroud and Dell or Collins running back with ETN and pieces of LA and Minnesota. Yeah, I mean, I think mini stacking the LA and Minnesota game as a secondary stack can work just as well. I know a lot of people, I guess, we called Houston last week as being an okay stack, and now everyone's on the train to them for week 3, so I don't hate it.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the next stats you and I were going to talk about. At least for me, it's tied for 4th in my stack rankings is Jacksonville and Houston. Houston missing now 4 defensive starters. Their middle linebacker, their best corner, Derek Stingley, injured in practice. Their slot corner and their safety. You have to expect this gives a major boost to Jacksonville's offense, despite how poor they have played through the first couple of weeks and have disappointed. But another little sneaky tidbit here is Zay Jones is out. That opens up just more passing volume. His extra few targets are going to go to Ridley. They're going to go to Christian Kirk. They're going to go to Evan Ingram. If you're playing 150 max, you're looking for a 1% guy. Tim Jones is expected to replace Zay Jones, so Tim for Zay in 3 wide receiver sets. So there's a 3K option for you. But I mean, Stroud, Collins, Tank Dell, even Robert Woods are all too cheap given how much they truly are passing the ball in Houston Moose. So this is I think one of the key stacks to play if you're trying to do the strategy that we talked about and that Hawk Dark suggested there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and as Dot Bets pointed out, I don't know why this total is only 44. I feel like it should be just a smidge
Yeah,
higher.
man, that's sketchy.
So I don't know what they know that we don't know, but yeah, it's gonna be interesting. I like the stack. You know, I was on Houston last week. I had them in my single bullet for the Millie Maker, and cashed that. I think there's just too many cheap pieces, right? There's just so much going on in that game that
Yeah, I agree.
I think you have to fit if you're doing, especially if you're doing a large field contest, you're mass multi entering something, even for 20 max, maybe 3 entry max. I think that they should be one of your top high risk stacks that you play. Pick a side. I don't care which side you do, but I think you have to get somebody from that game somehow.
I agree, Moose. And I'm just gonna run down ownership in that game for you really quickly. So, highest to lowest, we have ETN. This is DraftKings. ETN projected 19%, Calvin Ridley 15%, Kirk at 12% at 5,400, Nico 17%, 5,300. So people are finally catching on to Nico Collins after he had the big game last week. But Evan Ingram 8%, Woods 4%, Damian Pierce 4%, Tank Dell 6%. Maybe Tank Dell is the way to go at 3,600. And Dalton Schultz at 2%. And as I said, Tim Jones, we actually haven't projected for 0% at 3K. So, it's not going to go under the radar. So just because you play this stack and fit in those other pieces, don't think, oh, this is an idea no one's going to have. People are thinking about it. They just won't play the quarterback with it.
Exactly, yeah. I got to say, David is, thank you, David, for the support. He says, I'm at work hiding in the break room to watch. I love the enthusiasm. Yes.
Yes, man. Thank you. Listen, if they catch you there, then you got to go take a shit, right? And then you're in the bathroom for 20 minutes watching too. Just get those headphones in.
Oh, that's like that's the old Christmas NBA DFS special. There, you go to the bathroom at your family's house while you're doing your late swap.
Yes, definitely.
Actually, Life's MVP has a question here. It says, what's your thoughts on Mingo/Shark for a cheap wide receiver? Mingo is 3,400. Shark is 3,800. Kind of low in the model. I'm curious to get your thoughts on them, Brian.
Yeah, Chark is still. Let me look at routes run last week because I know Chark made his way back from hamstring injury last week. Let me pull it up just to double check here for you. On offense, pass. Yeah, Chark ran 27 routes. Terrace Marshall 14. So not fully back. He might fully be back this week when you consider Mingo and Thielen ran 39 and 41 routes. So Thielen 3,900, Mingo 3,400, Chark 3,800. These are cheap guys. All 8% or less owned. Mingo especially low, owned at 3%. Seattle missing 2 starting corners, Tariq Woolen, and their slot corner, Kobe Bryant. So missing 2 DBs. And honestly, Moose, I know you're a Red Rifle fan. I would imagine he's an upgrade. He's not great, but he's got to be an upgrade over what Bryce Young has done through 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, Andy Dalton, we know what he can do. He's not Patrick Mahomes, but he's not terrible. Like, he can get the job done. So, and especially with those cheap pieces, you just need, if you've got a 3K wide receiver, he gets a touchdown. That right there is really pretty much all you need. Get him a couple catches, call it a day.
Yeah, I agree. So long story short, Life's MVP. We like that idea.
Yes. Brian, one stack I want to talk about. I think we're actually on opposite sides on which side we actually like more. But the Indianapolis and Baltimore side, throughout the week, I was leaning towards the Baltimore side. I think now I'm a little bit more geared toward the Indianapolis side. I'm just trying to look at my notes here. I mean, I don't know. Minshew, is he the real deal? I think so.
He's cheap.
I think it goes back. I think that's what the whole concept of this was when I was building lineups. Is he's cheap. You can even run it back with Gus Edwards which is the craziest. Yes. I don't think that's ever been said in any DFS show in the history of DFS. But I mean, Pittman ranks pretty high up there. You hope that he gets concentrated volume. Even if you play the game script, Baltimore blows them out. I know we normally don't play, run backs on spreads when they get around 9-10 or so, but I think you can do that with, running back with Gus Edwards 1%. I mean, that's dumb. I like it. I'm trying to think. Looking at my notes here, anything else? Yeah, I mean, the only thing that would concern me is the center for Indianapolis is out. We've been seeing all year, the first couple weeks, how important offensive linemen are, so that does worry me a little bit. But again, 5,100 for a quarterback, paired up with wide receiver 1 for 6,200. Now you're able to fit in studs. I like that idea.
Yeah, so Baltimore, they've had injuries, like a ton of injuries, and you figure they faced Houston week 1, CJ Stroud's first start. They couldn't take advantage of the injuries. Sorry, Moose, the Bengals faced him week 2. Burrow just hobbled, couldn't take advantage of the injuries. Can Gardner Minshew take advantage of the injuries? Probably not, maybe. But they've also, so they're down Marlon Humphrey, their best cornerback. They're missing their starting free safety. He's out for the year, I believe. He's on IR at least. But they also lost their slot cornerback this past week. So that's 2 of their 3 top corners plus their starting safety out. Someone's got to take advantage of this for Christ's sakes, right? They can't keep getting away with this. So
Yeah.
Minshew, I will say this, right? We all at Occupy are huge fans of Anthony Richardson. We've been playing him through 2 weeks. But both can be true. He can be a great fantasy quarterback and a great real-life quarterback. But also, Gardner Minshew playing can raise the fantasy floor and ceiling of the pass catchers just because of the run-pass split that they're going to run.
Yeah.
Because of the lack of in rushing touchdowns from Anthony Richardson. So Pittman, I agree. Pierce deep shots. Josh Downs incredibly sneaky. It's when Baltimore's missing their slot corner. Downs is running almost all of his routes from the slot. The one thing, and we haven't talked about it yet, Moose, that could ruin this stack is the weather. You and I are on the East Coast here. Tropical storm moving up the East Coast. We have to monitor weather in totals in the betting markets to see the movement tomorrow morning. Because if we get 20-mile-per-hour gusts and this tropical storm rain through these East Coast games, that could really wipe out a lot of potential stacks.
Yeah, and does that mean, Brian, this is going to be a very dad joke, but if there's wind gusts, does that mean we play just Gus Edwards and call him the Gust?
Dude, just Gus. Wind Gus. We're all aboard the Gus bus. Whatever puns we can get on. 1% is crazy, Moose. I know you called it out, but 1% is nuts. Just for those who haven't been following the Baltimore backfield that closely, J.K. Dobbins tore his ACL week 1. Justice Hill, they thought so much of him, despite how much he hasn't been used in seasons past. Apparently, he had made a big leap this offseason. They basically did not play him in the preseason because they wanted to hold him out for the regular season and kind of unleash him in this new offense. We saw him get 2 rushing touchdowns in week 1. Him being out now, Gus Edwards is the guy. They have old and super washed up Melvin Gordon, old and super washed up, and just recently signed Kenyon Drake. Will these guys take touches? Yes, but Gus is the guy they know and trust. Would not be surprised to see Gus in this game, in this environment, log 20-plus touches.
Yeah, and again, we talked about with running backs as well. One of the biggest things we want to target are opportunities. The more opportunities they get, the higher chance they have to score. We know Baltimore's not passing as much as we thought they were going to throughout the season, so bump that rushing up. There we go.
Yep.
Dan has a question here. He says, if the weather gets as bad as it might, does that increase the Falcons-Lions stacks as viable?
Great question, Dave. And it certainly could. Atlanta's still going to play as if they're playing in a thunderstorm and a tropical storm with how much they run the ball. But Detroit may push them out of that comfort zone in the dome. So I'm with it. I like it. But we really have to be careful here. We won't know until tomorrow morning. We'll see the betting market totals drop quickly in the morning. If so, we'll check the weather. If it's just going to rain or the rain's subsiding and the game's going to be fine, I think we can open up all our stacks here. But let's be mindful because that could become an option late tomorrow morning.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know I talked about the Indianapolis side a lot. I know, Brian, you in your notes said that you like the Baltimore side better. Anything else that you want to add to that?
Not necessarily, just that, again, this is all if the weather is fine.
Yeah.
That Odell Beckham is out, so that just opens up more for Zay Flowers, opens up slightly more snaps for Rashad Bateman and Nelson Aguilar. So keep that in mind if you do choose to stack Baltimore tomorrow.
Yeah. Scarecrow says, what are your thoughts on Sims? One, it's a great video game. I need to start playing it again. But, Brian, what are your thoughts on simulations?
We probably have to dedicate an entire show to that. In my Cliff Notes, it is simulations in general are very powerful tools, especially in this industry. very, very powerful. However, in order to be powerful, they have to be built correctly and they have to be used correctly. I think especially as simulation tools become more widely available, we don't necessarily know the viability behind them. Only the people who make the sims know how truly good they are, right?
Yeah.
And know how good they can be for DFS. You and I could put out a sims tool and we could sell it to the public. Public would eat it up, and it could mean nothing. It could have zero predictive value, right?
Yeah.
Two, it could have the most predictive value, but if you're not using it correctly as a user, then it also reduces the benefits of it. I will say, I think as more and more industry pros develop their own simulations, that makes the game tougher.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think as more and more sites offer simulations and more people think they can win using that, I think it actually helps the game. So that's my high level opinion of it.
I think Sims are kind of like the AI craze that they have now. You have people who just say, "Oh, we have AI," and it's like,
Yeah.
What does that mean? We have AI and Chat GPT, and it's like I get it, but like again, it goes back to if it's built properly and how you have to use it, because I know they can be complicated to use. So it's gonna be I'm very interested in see how it goes from here. But yeah, Ed says you had me at the Colt stack, but running with Bateman's Edward double. I think that might be a little too aggressive even for my taste, Ed. Definitely. So, Brian, we're usually here about 30, 45 minutes or so. Now's the time we kind of get into the nitty gritty stacks, the ones that people start to leave the show over. These are the stacks that you really want to play only in, the $3 play action, the Millionaire Maker, these huge large field high risk contests. And Brian, where you like the stack, actually, I like the other side a little bit better. But I think that Arizona game, I think that's a good high risk stack, and I think it's got a lot going for it. Again, talk about super cheap piece that allows you to fit in a lot more studs. You could do something like Dobbs running back with Ertz, a ton of cheap wide receivers that you can fill in with that. Run it back with Tony Pollard, who's probably my favorite running back this slate. And then you can just fill it in with actually not 3K wide receivers who you have to pray for a Hail Mary to get a touchdown. I think there's just a lot going for it. If you stack that side, Trayvon Diggs out, so that's going to boost the Arizona wide receivers as well. Dallas offensive line are very questionable, so I think that goes with a little bit of a downgrade. That's what's concerning me, stacking the Dallas side. But yeah, I really do like that Arizona side.
It's interesting, man. I mean, we definitely have reached that part of the show where we're recommending 12-point underdog stacks in Arizona. But I do agree, right? Dobbs can run. That's the key. If you're going to play a cheap, big underdog, they better be able to run, and Dobbs can do that. So I certainly like that idea. Ertz, 18 targets through 2 games, despite 10 months removed from just a shredded knee and being like 35 years old. I mean, just chaotic usage by a team that's supposedly tanking for a 35-year-old. But that's a very cheap stack. I think it's combined like 8,500 or something like that.
Yeah.
The Dallas offensive lineman, starting center, starting guard, very questionable. We'll find out probably by 4 p.m. today if they're going to play. I did like the Dallas side just in a vacuum. CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson as big favorites. But there's a chance they just run this ball. I mean, it could be like week 1, right? If they blow them out like they did the Giants,
Yeah.
and they just run the ball and nobody really hits value. That's the danger of this game. That's why it ranks so lowly on the stack for me. But I mean, you were spot on most with that cheap Houston call last week. Now you're spot on with this Arizona call. I like it. I'm just trying to search the model, see if we see any other guys that are like sub 6,500, sub 6K at quarterback that makes sense as stack pieces. Do you see any other ones?
I mean, I'm sorting by DK ownership here, and looking at where is he? Arizona. I mean, Dobbs is literally like 0%. I mean, just look around. You have like Zach Wilson, Mac Jones. Both of them are also pretty low. Sam Howell. I mean, that could be a shootout game over there. Again, we have to worry about some other stuff. Andy Dalton around that. I don't know, man. That whole group just sucks. What I just talked about. So there's a reason why they're all like sub 2%. But again, it's one of those things we talk about, Brian. It's just you get to save the $2,000-$3,000, so you actually get to play someone who's going to get targets.
Exactly. Seattle stacks are interesting, right? Multiple options. Geno's 5,700 on DK. Desmond Ritter to whose point was it in the chat? Don't want to mix up names. It was Dan's point in the chat. Desmond Ritter 5K. If God forbid they don't get up and run the ball 100 times and they force him to throw Drake London, Kyle Pitts. Interesting. Jordan Love and Derek Carr in that game. No one's talking about. Uh, there are options. I mean, I talked about what Chuck moves. I think you and I even talked about it maybe last week. We talked about Chipotle Addict's strategy in week 1 in the 4K milli where he played really heavy Tyreek Hill, Austin Eckler from the highest total game. In this case, that would be 2 guys, 1 from each side in that Minnesota and LA game. And then he's rotated a bunch of stacks around it, right? If I get these mini stacks right and these high exposure one-offs right, then eventually I'll rotate through a decent stack and get near the top.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably a good strategy again this week with how tight the pricing is.
Yeah, and I see a question here from Scarecrow. He says I feel like this is Zach Wilson week. That's a bold call. I'm trying to look here.
Is that Jets 13's burner from our Discord?
Yeah, I mean it's tough. I mean I don't think the Jets have a player over 1% projected ownership in any position. So it'll definitely be that's actually true. Their highest is 1%. But yeah, there'll be a very low owned stack. I mean, if you think that's this week, you could pair him with Wilson, Lazard. I think the backfield's a little muddy. There's better options around the price.
Do Zach Wilson, Garrett Wilson.
Yeah.
And New England's down their top 2 corners. So, just saying, if the weather's right, just saying.
That's when you do the old showdown strategy. You do Zach Wilson and run it back with the Patriots defense.
Patriots defense. What an idea. There's like 3 pick sixes, but he also throws for like 350 and 3 touchdowns.
There we go. Absolutely. Let's see here. Let's see. Yeah, everyone in chat saying they would not play Zach Wilson. Yeah, that's probably the move. Brian, I know, like you said, you put in your rankings for Dallas. I know you mentioned a couple of things. Anything else you want to add for them?
I don't think so.
I think you want to talk about.
I don't think so. I think we've covered most of it. But Bet's question, high risk, is it still flex wide receiver this week? Because there are some cheaper running backs, so I didn't know if it was a week to flex running back. Maybe Moose, you can touch on this a little bit. But I agree with you in the sense that with the running backs that we have and how the stacks are shaking out, I do think it's a week to flex running back, especially if you're going the cheaper route. All those, the top 6 we mentioned in the model that are cheap, I think you just mash those guys in and save some salary for the high-end wide receivers.
Yeah, when I was running my stats and stuff and the lineup builder, see what fit, it was a lot more running back flexes than wide receiver flexes. I think this is the week where you go running back flex. I mean, I even think, Brian, maybe this is crazy. This might be more smaller field, maybe high risk. I don't know. But what do you think about tight end in the flex this week?
You're never going to catch me on stream saying that. So
figured I would catch you figured I'd catch you late in the show when we're talking about crazy stacks that might get you
absolutely
on
not.
That. But no, to answer Bet's question, yeah, I would absolutely just rotate a bunch of those cheap running backs, and go from there.
Yep, for sure. Moose Scarecrow says, sorry if you discussed this already. Would you fade Tua or Tyreek if Waddle is out, or does it make any difference? It certainly makes a difference because in theory, Denver could just completely shut down Tyreek, like focus all their attention.
Yeah.
I don't know why teams wouldn't do that anyways. But as we've seen, I mean, if you watch the primetime game against New England, like McDaniel is a very innovative play caller and play designer. He'll get Tyreek open. Like you can only shadow Tyreek so much when he's running full speed in motion in that CFL type action where he's getting full speed off the line. And you're like, okay, I can't guard Tyreek Hill when he's coming full speed and I'm stationary, right? So the more action, they're going to do more of that action with him if that's the case. And I really don't think it ends up being that big of a deal. Honestly, I like playing that stack even more if Waddle's out because we get those pieces like Berrios and Craycraft at much more affordable salaries in legit roles.
Yeah. One question I wanted to ask you, Brian, I know we've been touching on this each week, is at what point are you doing any 3-1 stacks this week? Or are there any teams that are viable for 3-1 stacks? Or do you still think that that's too much for high-risk contests?
I still think it's probably too much this early. The only teams I would do it for are Miami if Waddle's out, Kansas City if you want to pick one of those receivers. I think that might be it. Honestly, even maybe like a Houston 3x1 right? With the cheap receivers, Collins and Tank Dell, something like that. It has to be a cheap wide receiver that could play a ton.
Yeah.
That's the only time I would play 3-1 this early in the season.
Makes sense to me. And last thing is we usually pick a wide receiver who's cheap and low owned, and we're gonna go ahead and predict him to score a touchdown. Picked Tank Dell last week, got it right. Let's go.
Wow.
And been crushing these touchdown calls lately. But so sorting on DraftKings, 5K or less, under 5% over on DraftKings. Is there anyone there that stands out for you that you're saying, you know what, I think this guy's gonna score a touchdown?
All right, I'm gonna stick with it, and it's gonna be an if then. So I get two chances here.
Okay.
If Jalen Waddle is out, Braxton Berrios is the guy that scores the touchdown. If Jalen Waddle's in, again, we'll find out here shortly. Then I will go with. Just double checking here, just looking. I'll go with. You know what? I'll go with the rookie, 1% ownership, Jackson Smith and Jigba out in Seattle. That'll be my touchdown call if Waddle is out.
Okay. I'm looking here, and I think I'm gonna go with some of the Kansas City thing. I'm gonna go Sky Moore. I think Sky Moore gets it done. 1% owned at 4,400 on DraftKings. So that's my.
Let's take a look, because I know a lot of people were rightfully upset about how little production he put up in week 1 in prime time, and maybe some were concerned that would lead to him having a reduced role. He still ran the second most routes on the Chiefs last week, so still got a role there. Caught some passes, looked a little better, so I like him.
Perfect. And yeah, I think that'll do it. Is there any last thoughts or anything else you want to talk about before I take us out of here?
Just final content notes. So go check out Chris's main slate video last night. That goes over all the actual best plays. Like, we're talking about different ideas here and stacks and high risk ideas. Chris actually gives you the best plays, right? So go watch his video. It's here on YouTube on our channel. And then go read the daily plug, which you see on screen here. Top plays, high risk pivots, lineup construction tips, overall slate notes. Basically the roadmap to the slate. Go read that at occupyfantasy.com. Chris will be in our Discord tomorrow morning for a final Q&A, 11 a.m. Eastern. So make sure you're in there for that. And I think that's it as far as content goes. I'll be back on Monday with Jack for the 2-game short slate preview.
Cool. That may. Oh, jeez, I had to sneeze. Thought I had to sneeze at least, but not. Cool. And then yeah, we have UFC tonight. So go ahead and read the UFC daily plug that starts here in a couple hours. But yeah, until next week, I'm Moose, you're Brian. We're from OccupyFantasy.com. Have a good night.